So as we move into our final session, we'll focus on one of Columbia Climate School's most important commitments, shaping the next generation of climate leaders. To help set the stage, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Sandra Goldmark, Associate Dean for the Office of Engagement and Impact at the Climate School, as well as Professor of Professional Practice at Barnard College. Sandra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and for moving down. Somehow the lighting has magically shifted. It's amazing. As Alexis said, my name is Sandra Goldmark, the Associate Dean for Engagement and Impact here at the school. Before I launch in, I would love to we are going to have 2 rounds of faculty you're going to hear from today. If our first group wants to come up and join us up here so that we're all ready to go. That's Jeff, Johanna, Allison, Radley. And I'll join you in a minute because we're really here right now to hear from some of the next generation of leaders. I thought it was great to hear Peter McGinnis and Alexis talk about leadership just a moment ago and to hear the amazing speakers earlier in the day talking about their work. There are a lot of amazing leaders here in New York this week. Some real VIPs, it's very exciting. But I was thinking about the question Alexis asked and this question of what makes these people leaders. Yes, they're running companies or leading countries, but I think that there is also something else, something additional. And it made me think of, I have a friend named Umbreen Bhatti who ran the Athena Center for Leadership at Barnard for many years, and she always had a beautiful definition of leadership. She said, it's not a title or a specific role or a specific place in the power structure, but it's a person who can imagine the world they want to live in and who then takes action to build it and empowers others to join them. And I love that definition because in addition to the many recognized leaders, like the ones we heard from this morning, from the Dominican Republic, from California, from Impossible Foods, from our own climate school leadership, in addition, there are so many people here this week in New York who have less official roles and sometimes no title at all. Activists, storytellers, organizers, the people who are stepping up in their communities and in their organizations to push for change. And I think that includes our climate school students, our own generation of leaders. They are currently leading from where they are. And this is in a moment when in our country, we really need to broaden our understanding of leadership as so many are stepping back from their official commitments. So I'm so thrilled today to introduce an extraordinary group of young leaders. This is the inaugural cohort of our Global Impact Lab Impact Scholars. The Impact Lab is a new entity at the Climate School, an incubator for cross-sectoral climate solutions. We bring together teams of faculty and researchers with external partners to work on real-world challenges. And the student scholars are a critical piece, critical ingredient, secret sauce. I'm looking for an Impossible Foods analogy, but I'm not finding it, to this work. And this past summer, we had 5 teams of students working on faculty-led impact initiatives across our 5 focus areas: food, energy, water, the built environment, and disasters. And these students, before I hand the mic over, I just want to acknowledge their leadership because they are indeed, by any definition, but especially by the definition I mentioned earlier, leaders. They stepped up to imagine solutions, and then they stepped up to build them. And I will add, as our very first cohort, they were flexible, learning to pivot, to adjust, and to add their unique voice to the process of building this lab, this school, and these solutions. So here's what's going to happen. We are going to hear now from each of the 5 teams of students. We have here some of their faculty leads who are leading the projects. We'll have time in between each very brief 3-minute presentation from either a clarifying comment from the lead or perhaps a question from the audience. I'll moderate to make sure we stay on time because after this, we have a panel with another group of faculty leaders and to talk about how they're also shaping the next generation. So without further ado, I'm so thrilled to invite up, I'm going to advance so you can see, nope. The names and faces before, there we go. The first group is Belle, Arenson, and Ethan Hackmeyer, who worked on the Plastics Policy Toolkit. You guys ready to come on up?
There we go. Okay, that's better. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Hi, my name is Belle Arenson, and this is my coworker, Ethan Hackmeyer. This is our project, the Plastics Policy Toolkit, which we did under the supervision of Beizhan. So there's no easy solution to plastic pollution. International agreements are stalling, and few countries have plastic legislation at the federal level. This leaves state and local governments to pick up the slack. No single state or county can or should take the full responsibility for the 23 million plastic bags used in New York annually. Producer responsibility, scoping, and financing complications greatly influence plastic policy at the local level, which is also depending on social or economic factors. I analyzed the state and local level government's plastic policy in New York State using data and advising from the New York Sea Grant, Ambition Loop, the UNSD, and industry stakeholders. So this patchwork landscape of policy regulations and prohibitions can also be seen at the local level, as I described. So this is the plastics policy map that I made. It shows each county in New York highlighted, and when you click on a county, it'll pull up all of the relevant policy legislation for that area. So as an example, this is Albany County, and we can see here that there is a BPA prohibitory law for children's beverage containers, and the way that this database works is it pulls up keywords like food packaging when you enter it into the system, and that'll pull up all of the legislation for that specific area. So while Albany has this great BPA prohibitory law, it's only focused in Albany, which also shows some of the restrictions that come with local legislation.
With the fragmented policy landscape highlighted by Belle, we have a significant knowledge gap in how to achieve plastic reduction pathways. As we say in sustainability management, what gets measured gets managed. Greenhouse gas accounting, a standardized framework for decarbonization, is providing us with a clear pathway towards mitigating climate change. To solve our plastic problem, we need a similar strategy. Excuse me. To help bridge this knowledge gap, we are creating a holistic index to calculate the impact from plastic items. This summer, I led the first step, building a post-disposal index that can calculate the impact of any item once it has been discarded. So, we need to be able to understand just how long plastic items persist in the environment in order to understand their overall impact. The PDI does just that. Physical aspects of a good, environmental conditions, and lifetime estimates are used to calculate post-disposal durations. This figure is then further modified by governmental, economic, and social factors. These levers produce an index that is both reliable and scientifically backed, providing the missing information that manufacturers really need in order to contribute to a more sustainable future. Just like with carbon, there is a social cost to plastic, and this cost is slowly being recognized by governments around the world. This cost is slowly being recognized by governments around the world. Innovating now is allowing forward-thinking manufacturers to align themselves with the regulations of the future and also create a more durable product design with reduced reputational risk. While an international plastic reduction mandate is likely a long time in coming, this will allow leaders in sustainability to stay ahead of the game.
We're visualizing a disjointed policy landscape for stakeholders while also offering an innovative path forward for manufacturers to reduce their environmental impact. Let's make plastic pollution a problem of the past.
Thank you. So before we get a question from the audience, I just wanted to make sure that we have Jeff Schlegemilch, who's representing the disaster genome, Johanna Lovecchio, who's from the Adaptation Accelerator. You'll hear about these very soon. Radley Horton does many things at the Climate School and is pinch hitting today for Beizhan, who worked on the plastic policy. And Allison Rose is here representing the Food for Humanity alternative proteins. But I see we have a question right here for the team. The mic is coming.
All right. Thanks so much, and congratulations on your presentation. So as I look at it, I think you're on to something big, but have you also looked at what's already being done around plastic? Because there are a number of organizations that's focused on exactly what you're doing, and collaboration is key. Have you kind of thought about those potential partners?
Are you referring to the map or the index, or both?
I'm talking about, in overall, the fact that you're looking to solve this issue of plastic pollution. There are already existing organizations that are doing something similar. So I guess my question is, like, just are you looking for potential partners to collaborate with?
Sure. I mean, the answer is yes. I think we're always open to collaboration. One of the main values of the Impact Scholar program is co-production, collaborating with different groups. As for the map, which I've mainly worked on, we've focused on using different data sources. So one of the major databases that's out there for plastic law is from Duke University. So being able to collaborate with other universities in the future, or collect information from NGOs on like what data they're getting to incorporate that into our projects would be really useful. This is just the first step in our project. So Ethan and I have been the ones developing the very first foundation. And so there will be future impact scholars in the cohorts after this that will get to continue to build off of them and hopefully sort of create their own connections with different organizations, if that answers your question. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the question. And I will also add that I know that Professor Jan has been developing a number of partnerships with nonprofits, with industry partners on this, and also in his broader work on plastics. So absolutely, because it is, as you say, a crowded and complicated landscape. Thank you, Belle and Ethan.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Awesome. All right. So my name is Zoe Adamopoulos, and before I start talking to you about alt proteins, I would love a quick show of hands. How many of you avoid eating GMOs? And I promise this is going to get somewhere. All right. Honestly, less hands than I thought. How many of you would still avoid eating GMOs, knowing that the National Academy of Science, the WHO, and the AMA have all confirmed that they have no adverse health effects? Okay. So for those of you who still have your hands raised, I totally get it, although not very many, so I'm glad. GMOs come with a whole host of baggage, whether it's secrecy, lawsuits, often being cultivated with harmful herbicides, or for many, it just simply comes down to the fact that they feel unnatural. So naturally, as someone who has worked in the alt protein sector for several years now, it made sense to study what went wrong with GMOs in order to inform and guide a similarly controversial food biotechnology, which is cultivated or lab-grown meat. So there were a couple parallels I quickly noticed that were quite strong, one of them being a gap between perception and science, political and regulatory backlash, online misinformation, and similarly that unease surrounding unnaturalness. As such, one of the key takeaways of my policy brief, which you can read here if you scan the QR code, I'll also have it at the end, is actually there's another industry I think cultivated meat could learn from, which is the supplements industry. They have somehow managed to convince millions of people to consume unnatural pills and powders in the name of health, despite lacking the regulatory oversight that's actually required for cultivated meat. So why does this even matter? Well, as many of you know, industrial livestock production is unsustainable for our planet. And eating more plant-rich diets is one of the most effective climate solutions we have across all sectors. Yet, in high-income countries, alt proteins are still struggling to overcome consumer barriers. This is where the Columbia Climate School's Food for Humanity initiative comes in. As you can see, there are many players already shaping the alt protein ecosystem, including Impossible. Of course, I had to include them there. But Food for Humanity can play a really crucial role in researching the climate, nutrition, food security, and social implications of integrating these proteins into our food system. So what's next for us? Well, while reducing industrial meat matters in places of abundance, it's also really important to strengthen nutrition in places where protein is scarce. This is why I'll be conducting a literature review on neglected protein-rich crops that are indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa that can help address nutritional gaps for women and children, but also help build more resilient local food systems. So whether through new technologies or indigenous crops, our protein future depends not just on impact potentials, but really on how well these foods can really connect with people, communities, consumers in action. So if this work resonates with you, please join us in making these protein futures a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. So Allison, do you want to add or comment, or should we go for a question from the audience? Audience? All right. Who has a question for Zoe?
Hi, Quasi, Cornell Extension. What do you think about insect protein?
Well, personally, I'm vegan, so I can't eat it. But I think with everything in the food system, it's always everything in general, solutions always need to be context dependent. So I think there are so many cultures and regions that have historically relied on insect protein. And for those places, we should scale up those solutions because they make sense for those cultures. But it's also similar to plant-based proteins or fungi protein. It really depends on where it's accessible. So I guess that would be my answer to specifically insect.
Thank you. Thank you, Zoe.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Pia Morrow. Oh, perfect. My name is Pia Morrow, and together with Samantha Dady, we are really excited to be here today to present the Action Collaborative focusing on energy, specifically on critical minerals. So this summer we were actually tasked by Columbia engineering Professor Ellen West with kind of understanding how to better integrate surrounding communities into mine development, specifically for critical minerals that are key to the energy transition. And we were essentially tasked with defining a new social contract for mining. So you might think to yourself or ask yourself, why do we need a new social contract for mining? Well, mining is both the solution and the problem, which we found out really quickly, which makes it a highly complex issue. Oh, thank you. And we know that we need critical minerals like lithium, nickel, and cobalt for renewable technologies, for grid upgrades, for storage systems. But we also know that the average mine just really takes an immense toll on surrounding communities, specifically a social toll, an environmental toll, which is. And while many of these minerals can, in theory, be infinitely recycled, today we still lack the infrastructure to recycle and also the stock of raw materials that we need to meet decarbonization goals. So therefore, mineral extraction actually remains indispensable to the energy transition. So we were asking ourselves, if we have to mine, how can we make it more sustainable and also more just?
To figure out how, we decided to talk with people on the ground. We explored 2 case studies, the first being Sigma Lithium's Grota do Cirilo mine in Minas Gerais, Brazil. This mining company in particular is known for its commitment to creating a more sustainable mining practices, specifically for their EV battery materials development. And we then looked into South 32's Hermosa mine in Arizona, which is where I'm from. This mine was the first mining project in the United States to be added to the FAST-41 process, which is a process that accelerates permitting for really important infrastructure projects. In particular, they focused on community engagement throughout this acceleration. This meant that they hosted mini town halls, they worked on creating various translation services, and also actually created a virtual experience for people to walk through the various trade-offs of this mine's development. In speaking with a bunch of stakeholders, like community leaders, our mining companies, journalists, we realized that while each of these communities does have very specific and very localized concerns with mine development, there were actually, on a whole, some overlapping themes. And these themes were waste, water, and wealth. That is, communities are most concerned with where the mining waste is going, what is going to happen to their water quality and quantity upon the mine's development, and are they going to be included in the wealth that's generated from the mine through job creation or direct investment? We discovered that when these concerns are not addressed through genuine engagement and community benefit sharing, they tend to slow mine development, heighten economic risk, delay returns on investment, and really most importantly, perpetuate historical inequities. So, what can the climate school do?
So Columbia's colleges and research institutes actually have an immense ecosystem of critical minerals research spanning technology, health, law and policy, and even more subcategories. However, we noticed that these entities actually operate mainly in silos. So what we want to do as the Action Collaborative of the Climate School is we want to actively create opportunities for all of these leaders and subject area experts to come together, sit on one table, and have the conversations. So actually what we are doing really soon, we're hosting a workshop with around 15 faculty members and researchers about critical minerals, and we just want to give the opportunity to create that momentum and to give that opportunity to join forces for these experts, and then also later on for communities, for mining companies, for students, and for other experts. So if you're interested in this work, feel free to connect with us, and thank you for listening.
Do we have a question for Pia and Sam?
Hi, this is just kind of a question adjacent to what y'all have been working on. Prior to moving here, I lived in Oakland, California, where I was aware of a company called Magrathea Metals. I don't know if you've heard of it, but their business model is effectively they are taking brine water and turning it into magnesium metal to avoid the mine processing in full. Have you guys seen this in your studies? Is this coming up? That's my question.
That is super interesting. And I haven't heard about it specifically. I think a piece of where this future research could get really exciting is looking at these next generation mining processes. We looked a lot more at like what the actual community impact is of these. So perhaps our project would be like, how does the community feel about this happening in Oakland, California? And like, where can we make things better? And where are they struggling right now? But that's super cool. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. It's great questions. Thank you, Sam and Pia.
Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Vanessa. I'm going to talk about the Adaptation Accelerator. The work of the Accelerator has been focused on adaptation needs by reimagining the coexistence of nature and urban spaces. Perhaps you have heard during this entire climate week that adaptation is now really a buzzword, but Columbia, the climate school, has been working on this for a couple of years. Also, that people start sharing that there are 4 trillion assets at risk, and because the mobilization of capital to those projects is ineffective so far, the finance gap is widening. There is a need for definitely having a concerted and a global approach to invest in adaptation, but we need to start by communicating the benefits and also follow a hands-down approach to design and de-risk those projects. Only then private capital will follow. This is how universities have been tackling or contributing to adaptation efforts. As I said before, the climate school has been delivering place-based transformations during the past 10 years. The value added here basically really goes beyond any commercial regular consulting advisory. Our work at the Accelerator incorporates community needs since its inception and also comes with award-winning design experts. The work has been kicked off by the Center of Resilient Cities and Landscapes, and it's really broad and global. This center is now affiliated to the Climate School. So where it leads, when new ideas are incubated, projects or proposals are co-generated, and in some cases really goes into building new infrastructure, like happened in Miami with a project called Brick Hill Drive that recently got funded. So these are the tools and the expertise that we can convene and provide to our partners, and basically this is the team behind. But the most important differentiation of our work to what you hear in the streets is that we are able to complement or consolidate these efforts and create place-based transformation solutions. During the summer, I had the pleasure to work with local communities in Colombia, in Cartagena, a place very close to my roots. And there, despite all these challenges you can see here, local philanthropists have made progress by preventing further sprawl and deforestation. So the Accelerator has been able to start a couple projects or to advise on projects during the past 2 years, initially with the design, special, and planning, but now what we are targeting is to advise on a financial instrument of set of instruments to finance these adaptation projects there. So if this resonates with you, please reach out to us.
Thank you. Johanna, did you want to add any comments or detail, or you want to know if there's questions? Question for Vanessa? All right, I think we can then move on to our fifth and last team, which is the Disaster Genome Project team.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Kalain Hosein, and before I jump into this, I do want to acknowledge that I'm a part of a 5-member team, the only one here, so I just want to acknowledge that it's a mammoth effort over the last 3 months and acknowledging their work. So I worked on the Disaster Genome Project, and we are living in an era of unprecedented disasters. Yet we know more about disaster science than ever before. The problem isn't knowledge. It's the stubborn gap between what we know and what gets implemented in practice. So the Disaster Genome Project is cracking this code. What we are trying to do is look at what exists out there, just like how our genetic makeup influences our health outcomes. Without determining it, we are looking at some social, environmental, political factors that shape how disasters unfold in communities. And we are at an inflection point. Climate change is supercharging disasters. We have stronger hurricanes, more intense wildfires, unprecedented flooding. Yet, disasters are becoming more expensive as cities and populations grow, and we have less recovery time between hazardous events. But here's a paradox, and I mentioned it earlier. We have more disaster science than ever before. We have medical institutions looking at the public health outcomes. We have earth scientists looking at the physical risks. We also have sociologists looking at the community dynamics. So we're not trying to create more research. What we're doing is translating and adapting what's already out there into tools people can actually use. The Disaster Genome Project exists because when disasters strike, communities need answers in real time. And that's why we're trying to bring everybody to the table. Our partners include community-based organizations that know their neighborhoods best, policymakers who shape recovery financing, and finance professionals who also control where investments flow. This project isn't about academics talking to other academics. It's about bringing everyone to the table. And this summer, we've spent more than 100 hours speaking to stakeholders, both within Colombia and across the world through stakeholder engagement sessions. And we've asked our partners through all of these engagement sessions hundreds of questions that they've come back to us to talk about. You can see them floating off the screen here, where we're trying to create tools that people will actually use. So through storytelling podcasts that bring data to life, policy guides that can be practical, and even an AI decision-making tool that makes this information not only accessible, but actionable. Suppose we have a practitioner who wants to create a wildfire recovery plan. Our tool, in this case, will look at the state-of-the-art research and answer specific questions, but also include multimedia support tools such as case studies, policy guides, and even podcast episodes that include subject matter experts if applicable. Now, the Disaster Genome Project, we are looking at partners from community-based organizations all the way up to federal agencies, always asking who has the power and how can we shift it to those that are most affected by disasters. So our ask is simple. If you believe that bridging this gap between research and practice can save lives and strengthen communities, we need you. If you're a policymaker, a funder, a student, or a finance professional, join us in making better strategies, better decisions, and better outcomes. My name is Kalain Hosein. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeff, you are the faculty lead on this project. Do you want to add some color for us, or do you want a question from the audience?
Just tremendous pride in the work of the whole team, but I think let them have it.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say congratulations on such an amazing and all-encompassing project. I'm very, very impressed by this work. So round of applause for you again. I guess a question that I had was, so earlier you mentioned bringing together community organizations as well as policymakers and financial institutions. And I think if we live in an ideal world, everyone works together to solve the climate crisis, and we're all happy. But I think the truth of the matter is that we're navigating a very volatile political landscape, and also I think just the nature of living in a very profit-driven capitalist system. It's not very evident to everyone who's at the most senior decision-making level that this should be our #1 priority, addressing the climate crisis. So how do you plan to go about implementing this tool in a way that can get, those decision makers on board?
That's a good question. And through our many hours of stakeholder engagement, we really went after mostly technocrats who work in the, decision-making space. And even with the community-based organizations, we always ask, so what would you use this tool for? And I think it's getting buy-in at all levels of government. When you attend events like New York Climate Week, you have a team of people working behind the figurehead. It's getting the buy-in from that team, through engaging them, ensuring that they know how the tool works, what the limitations of the tools are, but also the benefits of it. Jeff, do you want to add anything on that?
I would just add, that's absolutely correct, and I think that part of the idea behind the AI-powered tool is to be able to interact with the research on your terms. So a finance professional is going to look for a different value proposition than maybe a humanitarian organization, and maybe 80% of the research it draws from is going to be the same, but if you're looking, but a value proposition for shareholders versus public impact and things like that are going to sort of lean on sort of different aspects. And so that's the idea behind this too, is to also not create one answer that hits as many people as possible, but to allow the answer to meet people from where they're looking to derive value from it.
Thank you. That's great. I'm afraid we don't have time for more questions here because we have another panel, but the student and I hope the faculty will be out in the lobby after the event, and they would love to talk more about their work. So thank you to the faculty for giving us a peek into what I know is just actually a small piece of much larger projects that you've been working on for a long time. I'm sure people have a lot of questions for you. Thank you to the audience for those great questions, and most of all, thank you to the Student Impact Scholars for all of your work this summer and for your presentations today. And now I'm delighted to hand the mic over to our Senior Vice Dean, Jeff Shaman, who's going to moderate the last conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. What? No, you're not here. No, you're not here. I would love to have you here because you're fantastic, but Jeff, you're not here. I'm sorry. So a pleasure to see you all. I haven't met many of you at this point yet. My name is Jeff Shaman. I am indeed the Senior Vice Dean of the Climate School here at Columbia. We have a panel up here that includes 4 humans and a canine. I know the canine. He's very, very sweet. So we're going to go forward with that. We're going to be talking just about some issues that really relate to what we're doing here in the Climate School and what does this mean for implementation and practice going forward. And rather than hear me too much, I'm going to start getting into questions in a moment. But before I do, I would like to introduce the 4 panelists here a little more formally. All the way over on the left, Christina Douglas is an Associate Professor of Climate at the Climate School and a 2021 Carnegie Fellow. Her research explores human-environment interactions in coastal and island systems, especially in places experiencing biodiversity loss, climate change, and resource stress. She leads inclusive, co-produced work with Indigenous and descendant community partners, integrating anthropology, ecology, climate science, and long-term historical perspectives. Next, I'm going to go in order from left to right here. Radley Horton is a professor of climate, also at the Climate School. If you're a professor of climate, you're at the Climate School. He studies extreme events and their societal impacts, working closely with decision makers outside academia on adaptation solutions. His current research is focused on co-producing with decision makers techniques for assessing and planning for tail risks that standard quantitative modeling frameworks may fail to account for. Tail risks are those extreme events that we encounter that are less common, but perhaps growing more common these days. Next, we have Johanna Lovecchio. She is the Senior Director of Engagement and Impact at the Climate School, and she forges strategic partnerships that connect the school to the field of practice. She also leads initiatives on urban adaptation and resilience, including the Adaptation Accelerator. As an adjunct faculty, she teaches the Earth Studio, a signature travel course with the Graduate School of Architecture, Preservation, and Planning's Urban Design program that integrates spatial planning, policy, and finance alongside global cities and vulnerable communities. And lastly, on my left, but certainly not least, Vicky Farini is a senior research scientist at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, where she uses advanced mapping techniques to study the processes that shape the seafloor across diverse environments. She has led and participated in research expeditions worldwide, mapping shallow waters and deep sea systems with ships, submersibles, and towed platforms. She's headed the Seabed 2030 Regional Center for the Atlantic and Indian Ocean and champions open and accessible marine geoscience data for the scientific community and the public. All right, so let's get on to our questions. First question, I'm going to start with you, Christina, all the way down on the end there. Something that you think about quite a bit is learning and implementation and partnership. How do you bridge learning and the practice and implementation gap, you know? Actually getting out of the classroom and into what we need to do in the real world, in the field, in the boardroom. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Jeff. Well, first of all, thank you so much for all being here. It's really great. It's been a busy climate week. I'm sure everybody is buzzing around different events. And my answer is going to really follow on something I said this morning at a National Resource Defense Council panel about how do we learn to build community in all of the spaces we are in as a really critical skill, not just for being collaborative and successful in whatever sector we may be a part of, but also to really understand how we as humans adapt and how we have done so for hundreds of thousands of years. Building community is something that is becoming maybe a buzzword, or maybe the term community is becoming a buzzword, as are terms like co-production. But I think all of us can really understand what building community means if we think about our learning, especially as kids embedded in family groups and smaller communities, right, that bring us up and teach us things. A lot of it is about building connections and relationships with one another. All of us have very different perspectives, backgrounds, expertise. And a lot of times when we get involved in collaborative work, there's all of this stuff that we have to cut through to actually be able to get at what my expertise may be and my experience and what someone else's may be. I see Janice right here, so I'm looking at Janice. How can we actually maximize effective collaboration and working together? So a lot of what I feel like I end up teaching is connecting back to human evolution and adaptation, understanding that we as humans adapt in large part through transmitting knowledge across our groups, but also through time to successive generations. And we do that through our social connections. It doesn't come out of nowhere. Information flows, the transfer of adaptive knowledge over many generations is something that we actually don't understand very well in terms of the mechanisms that promote it. But I think we're starting to get closer to understanding some of those mechanisms, especially when we think about how we learn in groups, in social groups, in communities. So getting outside of the classroom, but also in the classroom, how can we really identify what those knowledge transmission processes are and the skills that we need as humans to enable that, and then implement that in all of the spheres that we work in. Again, whether that's in the classroom and having discussion where people are really connecting with and acknowledging the other people in the classroom and having real dynamic dialogue. I like to think about interdisciplinarity as not so much how can I, as an archaeologist, perhaps collaborate with a physicist, but rather how can I really connect with somebody who is a physicist and think through their experience and their expertise about archaeological problems, really kind of wearing their shoes, so to speak. But a lot of that is about building those collaborative kind of community-based skills. So I implement that also in the field. When we do field work, we are working very closely with communities, in this case, communities in Southwest Madagascar that are experiencing tremendous impacts of climate change. And any students who are involved in those projects are really first learning how to build real relationships with communities. This is something that takes time, and it's also something that requires those community building skills that we don't necessarily always focus on as a hard skill, but really is critical if we're going to build the kinds of partnerships that will allow us to do a lot of the things we aspire to. You know, work on equitable solutions, bring in a plurality of voices. So that's one answer. I'm sure there are others, but there are some amazing people up here who I'm sure can add more.
Thank you, Christina. So, Johanna, I'm going to turn to you to build off that because you engage in interdisciplinary pedagogy and you've been working with our impact collaboratives. Where do you see this bridge between, you know, essentially implementation and that and what we're doing to foster learning?
Yeah, so Thanks everyone for coming. Really excited to be here and to talk to everyone. In addition to all the wise and amazing comments from Christina, one way that we also like to think about partnership is about the decisions that are actively getting made now, right? There are decisions that, Kalain, you talked about this really well. There are decisions that are getting made now that are political, that are financial, that are social, even what we eat right now, right? So one way that I like to think about it is to sort of source and find the spaces where people are grappling with really difficult decisions, planning exercises, policy, and complex information and social and cultural context, and introduce that into the classroom in such a way that the students are exposed to both the complexity of global and local challenges and are also in service of some of those really difficult questions on the ground. So for example, Vanessa talked a little bit about our work in Cartagena. This all started in the classroom. We had a travel class that went to Colombia, and students went to Cali, Bogota, and Cartagena. They were looking at the impacts of climate displacement, but we did that in direct partnership with the mayor's offices of each of those cities, as well as local universities in place, and local community partners and philanthropies who were activating on the ground, really getting a sense of some of the political and social movement building that was there, and being sort of a partner to processes that were already playing out, not like coming in and saying, you should do this. We're finding opportunities where there's a chance to plug in, amplify, and help convene to uplift some of the really important work that's already going on. And this is a principle that we're carrying through a lot of the work at the Climate School, through the Office of Engagement and Impact and the Impact Lab itself. So partnership is a huge feature of all of the work, and really thinking through how we can reverse this sort of one-way street of research to practice, but that we're also sourcing really big questions on the ground and making sure that research and the teaching environment is helping to resolve some of those challenges. One other example is I have the privilege of teaching the applied climate class with Radley and Sandra. And one thing that we do in that class is we review former capstone client work that's really ripe for a review or a relook. One of the student teams this year is looking in partnership with the Office of Management and Budget here in New York City, which is thinking about adaptation measurement. This is a particularly important time to be reviewing that work as we're just on the eve of a major mayoral election. So trying to really make sure that these questions are in the contemporary challenges of our time is one way that we approach it at the school.
Fantastic. Radley, do you want to pick up with that a little bit? I know you teach an applied field course as well, and we talked about that in your bio even. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think just to sort of quickly highlight the experiences of just taking every opportunity we can to engage with decision makers of various types, recommending the diversity of types of decision makers, the importance of these interdisciplinary approaches, and just really the varied experiences that come out of it, whether it's also things like the convenings that we've done over the years at the Climate School, things like our conferences on managed retreat or extreme heat events, really start from the beginning with sort of an ethos of physical science developments, but also that if we're going to make progress in defining the challenges and also the solutions, that a lot of that energy is going to come from the very different decision contexts among different actors, some of them very contested. And some of it just has to do with things that might seem very mundane, like the legacies of when budgets become available, or which types of issues are part of a mandate for an organization, or sort of existing decision culture. So it's an endless opportunity, sort of selfishly, I think, for all of us to learn more about the world and to define really interesting research questions for us, but ultimately to in ways that you both said in much more articulate ways, find resonance with communities and sort of shared meaning and go beyond what we'd otherwise be able to do in academia.
Thank you. And Vicki, your perspective really, you work heavily in the applied science field, and you also work in transnational and international bodies of water, and there's got to be politics there. There got to be things that students encounter that is sort of seeing the reality of how you conduct science at large scale in a complex world. Does that have bearing on what we're talking about here?
Yeah, very much so. And I think the themes that kind of have resonated for me from what's been said already is first and foremost community and trust and building relationships and connections. And so most of my career, I've worked with the academic community, providing data services, and it's a long process to build trust and get people comfortable with sharing data. The big advantage that we've had in the US space is that it's been required by funding agencies. So we've had what I like to think of as a carrot stick. I don't really want to wield a stick, but it is a carrot to be able to have access to data. So now with Seabed 2030, which is aspiring to create a complete map of the ocean floor by 2030, and we're at 27% now in 2025, so we have a long ways to go. We get to take those skills and apply it to a different space. We have to talk across the maritime sector, to governments, to industry, to people that don't have the same kinds of rules and customs of sharing data, and figure out where the common ground is, and figure out how to change our messaging to really resonate with the different people. And so as I go to places like Sri Lanka and India and places where I'm much less culturally familiar, I enter that space with humility and listening. And this is what my team does and the students that work with us. We really try to prioritize listening and understanding the people that we're interacting with, because this is the way to bridge the divides and really help to get more people on board.
And Vicki, do you feel that that helps us set the students and the students you mentor into a place where they can understand the realities of it? They know how to lead in the field. They can be climate leaders, if you will.
I think very much so. And we also have the opportunity, because the region that we steward from the Atlantic through the Indian Ocean is so vast and reaches so many different cultures and so much diversity, we get to bring that and the expertise and perspectives of the students to bear, right? So a young person in my team who started with us as a student is from the Dominican Republic, and she has helped to nurture a relationship with the Navy in the Dominican Republic, and they've now contributed data. And so we get to have these experiences, and I think the biggest thing is really focusing on how we communicate, because what we do as scientists and practitioners is great and it's valuable, but if we're not connecting to the people who have the potential to benefit from the work that we're doing and join us and elevate and accelerate, then we're missing a big opportunity. So really focusing on communication is really important.
Absolutely. Christina, what are your thoughts on that? How are we setting our students up to be leaders going forward in climate?
One of the most exceptional things about the climate school is how diverse the students are who come here, and not just diverse in terms of their interests and their background, but really also in terms of what their professional goals are. And it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes to think about that diversity of goals and what then can I, for example, as an archaeologist, contribute to folks who are going to be going out into every possible sector all over the world. I do think that, as Peter McGinnis was talking about earlier, cultivating what your passion is the real first step toward a career where you can shine fully as a leader. And so I think part of what we need to do here at the Climate School is really affirm that the creativity and the ideas that students come here with is where they should dig in and explore. We can provide a lot of, I think, very important foundational understandings of the climate system and of work in different sectors to deal with the climate crisis, and then nurturing the interests that particular students may have is a really, I think, important thing that we can do. And to add to what I was saying earlier, and I think also to what Peter was saying about leadership being really fundamentally about being a contributing and caring member of your community. I've been so moved by the students in this cohort of the 3 climate school master's programs at how already, with only a couple of weeks of the semester under their belt, they've already formed bonds and mutual aid and a network of support in this learning journey. And I think that what they are doing already, and as much as we can encourage that, is developing leadership skills, the kinds of leaders that we really want to see, who are going to understand that we will never solve any of these questions or problems on our own, no matter how sophisticated a particular field's science or research may be. It is going to take everyone and the best of everyone to be able to address this crisis. And how do we do that? Well, we really have to build that network and build that community of people who are willing to, drop their guard and do the best that they can with the best that they have to address the problem. So I think in many ways, you all as students who may be here, those who are students here, you all are already demonstrating that strong leadership quality, which is to support one another and to move forward collectively rather than individually.
Johanna, what are your thoughts on this, on building student leaders in climate?
Yeah. So I kind of think about this in 2 ways. And the first way is through the that's not only the spirit of interdisciplinarity that exists at the climate school, but the structural ways that interdisciplinarity is baked into the school, whether that's through the impact lab and the ways in which projects are getting seeded with a requirement for interdisciplinarity, or through the Earth networks that are fundamentally interdisciplinary groups and communities of practice. It's also made expressed by the diversity of faculty that are at the school, the joint appointments that are at the school, and in the pedagogies themselves. So one way that this is expressed in my work is through the Earth Studio, which Jeff introduced. It's a partnership, and it's a applied partnership between the climate school, where there's 10 or 12 climate and society, soon to be climate and society, climate science, and climate finance students in one cohort in the climate school section. And then we partner with the GSAP Urban Design and Architecture program. So we're teaming up between 2 different schools, which is a really interesting thing to do because it teaches you how to engage a whole other discipline in practice. What does an urban designer do? What does a climate scientist know? What is a payment for ecosystem services? These are all things that can really get worked out in a classroom, so you know how to engage those folks when you're out in the working world. And then one other thing is, sort of how to collaborate, but then the skills that you need to collaborate. So leaving the school with ideas, frameworks, and practice in communication, in how to facilitate and run a workshop. What are the principles of co-production, and what are the fault lines related to that? How do I do a power map, and when do I do that, and with whom do I do that, and how do I understand some of these relationships, and how do we build an ethic together around how to move forward with trust and collaboration? These are all things that kind of get tested in the classroom and in these spaces, which are real skills.
Thank you. Radley, anything you want to add on this topic? Building climate leaders?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll lean in a little further to some of the points that have been made about complexity. I think that's a really key element that we can provide an avenue through that interdisciplinarity to describe just how complex all these interactions are, and all the sort of myriad of rapid sort of transformations in risks, but also opportunities. It's really dizzying. And And I think just to give sort of one example from what I try to do in this climate risk assessment course, for example, is to highlight on the one hand the importance of quantitative modeling as a very valuable tool to help us assess risks and opportunities and shape solutions, but also through that experience of getting feedback from the students, talking about their own personal experiences in their lives and their professional lives, setting up workshops or scenario activities that we conduct where we sort of intentionally lean into all that complexity and start to probe and say, are some of these relationships so compounding and cascading and interrelated that it might be impossible to even quantify exactly what the risks are? And in those kind of environments, how can we move forward? Can we pivot, for example, to frameworks that are maybe more around what types of decisions are robust in the face of a variety of uncertainties, or what types of decisions might be supportive of broad societal goals while simultaneously being conducive to reducing emissions or expanding adaptation. So that's just sort of one example, leaning into these sort of qualitative, scenario-based approaches where we intentionally try to sort of model a bunch of sectors and just identify the relationships and the potential actors in decisions. I think the overall sort of theme would be, as was mentioned earlier, whatever your area of expertise, your experience and interest is, it's going to be intersectional with climate and these broader issues, but sort of helping to convey and model through our own listening the ways that learning how to interact outside of your discipline and to practice some of those, I don't know if they were called soft skills or sort of the EQ skills, are, as to mirror what we heard earlier, probably likely to be more important in the end than maybe the particular training we bring to the table.
Thank you. Radley, sticking with you and pivoting to research, what do you think are some of the examples of how research today, cutting-edge examples of it, are leading to lasting change in fields of climate and sustainability?
Yeah, so there's so many examples of this at the climate school and beyond. But some things that I really wanted to highlight: the work, for example, of Dan Westervelt here at Columbia, someone who has really, along with students he's worked with here at Columbia and internationally, are advancing forward so much about air pollution issues, especially in the global south, working in citizen science capacities as well to understand these really high exposures to very devastating air quality among high population regions with high vulnerability. So increasing the sort of monitoring and awareness of these hazards and risks as a step towards getting more attention towards solutions and really understanding those extreme vulnerabilities. That would be one example, I would say, that's really fundamental of many. Another maybe to highlight is work at the climate school, sort of related to what I was saying about complexity, but specifically about compound extreme events and the importance of changing our framing so that we don't think about events in isolation. If you're thinking about a company or a city, try to think about all the ways that climate hazards outside of that city will impact the city. Try to think about the way that other countries might be leading in solutions. How is that going to cascade and have impacts on a location? So how do we sort of identify that compound framing? That's something we're seeing a lot of decision makers in New York. The next round of New York City's panel on climate change, New York State's assessment, our utilities, I think it wouldn't be quite right to say that we at the university are totally leading it, but they're with us in dialogue, helping us identify which types of sequences of events, for example, will matter the most. In the past, have they been most affected by that heat wave after a storm knocked out the power? So another example, but they're sort of on a journey with us to sort of learn about the interface of supply and demand of new knowledge.
And I'm hearing in both those examples, there's co-production, there's interaction.
Absolutely.
If you're going to have a solution, you have to have partners for implementation, such as with the Clean Air Toolbox. Vicki, what do you think for your research? Where do you see connections to Earth, society, climate, and the whole?
Well, everywhere, right? So I've been sitting here thinking about how the interconnectedness is really the key thing, and I see this across all the different spaces in my professional world. I think that that is the key to accelerating progress, especially when we're facing these big, daunting challenges, whether it be trying to map the planet completely for the first time or address the climate crisis. But I also think that we're in a transition. I was going to say moment, but it's not a moment. It's a transition that is partly perhaps generational, it's partly technology-driven, and it's partly the recognition that we can't do things in silos. We need to disseminate power and tools and knowledge and grow the community together and figure out the ways that the work that we do has impact, make sure that we're not presuming and telling people how it, what needs to be done, but listening again and making sure that we're meeting those demands. And it's really that connectivity, I think, that is the special sauce that we need to be investing in for the future.
Fantastic. I think everybody wants a special sauce. I'm being given a cut it off. I got the big T from Jennifer over here. We started late and I was taking my time, but it is 5 p.m. And I'm being told to cut off. We're all so long-winded is the problem. The only one who's really quiet here is Kiwi. I was going to go next to Christina, but I think we have a hard stop, right? Do we? One more? I'll look over at the fearless leader, and she's smiling. All right. So, Christina, let me lean into you then a little bit. How do you feel that this is needed? What is this? How do you feel that the school has a role in changing how we do education and research in this space? What is the place for that? And I'm going to give you the last word because Dean Abramson is waiting here.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Dean Abramson. I'm going to be brief. I will just frame this as my own experience coming from an anthropology department as faculty at Penn State before I came to Columbia, and now being a member of the Columbia Climate School faculty. Somebody asked me yesterday evening what that experience was like and whether I miss being in an anthropology department. And the answer is, I do miss being in an anthropology department sometimes, and I love the focus at the climate school on what Radley was talking about, which is the complexity and how we come together really to address that complexity. And I will say in an even more focused way that for me, now being able to really focus on what are the key questions, regardless of my disciplinary background, regardless of my technical training and expertise, what are the questions we need to be asking? And this, I think, also addresses the previous question too about, what can we bring to students and encourage leadership? We need to focus on the question development. That is the hardest thing to get right. But if we don't get the right questions, and it doesn't really matter how fancy the techniques might be, right, or how much data we have, we're not necessarily going to come up with any kind of answer, results, or solutions that are ultimately going to be helpful. So building the right questions is, I think, the role that we can play as a climate school that is transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, integrative, really a place of convening without the traditional silos and finding all kinds of ways. I mean, you've seen with this showcase so many different examples from research and pedagogy to applied practice of us coming together, trying to break down those traditional silos, and at the core, answer good questions. What is a good question? Well, that'll go longer than I think anybody up here wants to let me go on for. But I think that that's really key, and that's something that we can do uniquely well here at the Climate School, given the sort of structure, the investment and support in how this program, this school is growing, is really like, let's ask the right questions and let's develop those questions in partnership with the communities that are impacted by the answer and by the solutions we can come up with.
All right, I think we're going to end on that fantastic note. I want to thank all our panelists, Christina, Radley, Johanna, and Vicky, and thank you for your time. And I think I have to give the microphone to the... Oh, you got one there?
You're good, Jeff.
Okay, good.
And really quickly, just a big thank you. This is like puts me in my happy place to hear you all speak. We've got scientists and social scientists and practitioners and just across all the disciplines thinking about how to do this in so many different ways. And just a big thank you to everybody who participated in today's showcase. We've heard really powerful examples of leadership and innovation, education and action, and they're reminding us that the climate crisis requires collaboration, as you just heard, across sectors and generations. And I hope you all leave a bit more inspired than you did when you walked in and a little more energized to help us find the solution. So thank you. Look forward to working together.